Hello and welcome to the Walden University Presidential Youth Debate. I'm Anthony Tedesco, founder of the Presidential Youth Debates and of Portable Heroes, the producer of this event. On behalf of our host, Walden University, and millions of young Americans nationwide, I'd like to thank Senator Obama and Senator McCain for answering these 14 previously unanswered questions that young Americans themselves have chosen as most important to them and to their votes. Our first two questions are from our co-moderators, Chris Nelson, editor of Pop and Politics, and Rich Williams, higher education advocate of U.S. PIRG. Our next 10 questions were submitted and chosen as most important by 18 to 35-year-olds nationwide. Our final two questions were submitted by 13 to 17-year-old future voters and chosen by them as their two greatest concerns. We've asked that the candidates limit their responses to 2 minutes, and we provided the questions ahead of time so they could give us specific, well-thought-out answers. The answers young Americans need to vote for the future they want. And answers that will give Americans of all ages their last look at where the candidates stand on the same issues before the election.
Hi, my name is Rich Williams and I'm the co-moderator for the Walden University Presidential Youth Debate and Higher Education Associate for the United States Public Interest Research Group. I'm from Washington, D.C. and I'm 23 years old. And here's my question. Senator McCain, Senator Obama. Young people across the country are very worried about the financial crisis. They need to get student loans for school and find jobs after graduation. The Wall Street crisis and bailout happened largely because of a breakdown in oversight. So will you support an independent, government-created agency led by consumers that will protect the public and shareholders to prevent something like this from ever happening again? What additional protections would you propose?
Thanks for your question. And first, I want to thank Walden University and all of you for inviting me to participate in this debate. I know young people are worried about their future. We're facing the most severe economic crisis in a generation. It's hard to pay for gas or find a job or get a loan for that college you've dreamed of attending. But here's what else I know. We can steer ourselves out of this crisis because at every moment in our history, we've risen to meet our challenges, not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but as Americans. We can do it again. But we'll take new direction and new leadership in Washington. And that's why I'm running for president. And as president, protecting taxpayer dollars will be my top priority. From the day I take office, I will demand a full review of the rescue plan to make sure that it's working for taxpayers and that taxpayers are getting their money back. I've proposed a financial stability fee that says if we see losses, Wall Street foots the bill, not taxpayers. And we'll put in place the common sense regulations and rules of the road that I've been calling for since March. Rules that will keep our market free and fair and honest. Rules that will restore accountability and responsibility in our corporate boardrooms. Rules that will help prevent a crisis like this from ever happening again. I believe we can steer ourselves out of this crisis because I believe in America. And if you stand with me on November 4th, then together we can overcome the broken policies and divided politics of the last 8 years and renew America's promise.
If I'm elected president, I'll act immediately with reforms to restore the fairness, integrity, and financial sanity to the institutions that have failed us on Wall Street. We will apply new rules to Wall Street to end the frenzies of speculation by people that were gaming the system and make sure that this present crisis is never repeated. I'll consider all approaches to responsible oversight over our financial institutions, and I recognize that Americans demand a sensible balance of oversight and market freedom to get our economy moving again. We got to take steps as soon as possible to keep Americans in their homes. That's the American dream. I proposed a plan to allow Americans who have fallen behind on their mortgages to obtain new mortgages with little help from the government. This will not only help American families struggling to make ends meet, but it'll also stop the plunge in housing prices that have caused and exacerbated and made far worse the current crisis. This crisis, my friends, started with the collapse of the housing market. The values of houses literally collapsed because of corrupt practices and excess and greed in Washington and on Wall Street. Those people have to be punished, my friends. We're angry. Everybody in your family's angry, and you have every right to be angry. And we've got to hold them accountable. But the first thing we need to do is keep people in their homes. And my plan will do that. And I'm confident that as president, we can turn this crisis around, create jobs, get our economy strong again, and assure you a much brighter future than the one you're facing today because of the failure of the people you believed in and trusted. You can trust me. I warned about this crisis. I warned about it a long time ago. I supported legislation to fix Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And unfortunately, they had too much influence, too many lobbyists, too many members of Congress were defending them in their corrupt practices.
Hi, my name is Chris Nelson. I'm the co-moderator for the Walden University Presidential Youth Debate and also the editor for popandpolitics.com. I'm 29 years old, I'm from California, and this is my question. Is there a realistic way for the government to drive down the consumption of oil and investment in green technologies while still keeping big oil a key economic player and not risking an all-out blockade of such legislation by their lobbying arms? What incentives can we provide these companies to invest in future technologies without isolating such powerful domestic economic drivers?
I have proposed a sort of what I would call all of the above approach to energy. I believe we got to tap all of our domestic resources, offshore oil and natural gas, nuclear, wind, solar, hydro, and biofuel. And you know, the strategy has got to get us off the dependence on foreign oil. We're sending $700 billion a year of your parents and your money to countries that don't like us very much. And we've got to move towards green energy. Green energy is the future, not only to address climate change, but also, more importantly, to get us off our dependence on foreign oil. Look, I want to give incentives to consumers and automakers so that we can have fuel-efficient vehicles like electric cars, flex fuel cars, hydrogen. We should update our electricity grid so that we can be more efficient in our use of power. But we've finally got to get serious about climate change. I've led the fight for a long time, thanks to young people way back when I first ran for president in 2000 that said, what are you going to do about global warming? I reached across the aisle and we proposed legislation. My friends, we didn't succeed in passing that legislation because the special interests beat us. But we've always gone back into the fight. And if I'm president, I'll work with Congress to establish a system that basically puts incentives for people to save on greenhouse gas emissions and therefore earn credits, which will then encourage everybody to reduce and eliminate our greenhouse gas emissions. And by the way, clean coal technology is one of them. But also, I will enter into negotiations for a global, including India and China, system where around the globe we reduce and eventually eliminate greenhouse gas emissions to levels that are acceptable to protect our planet. I need to do that for you, my friends.
Our addiction to foreign oil is one of the most dangerous and urgent threats this nation's ever faced. From the gas prices that are wiping out paychecks and straining businesses, to the instability and terror bred in the Middle East, to rising oceans and a warming planet. In the short term, as we transition to renewable energy, we can and should increase our domestic production of oil and natural gas. But now is the time to fast-track my plan for energy made in America that commits to renewable energy, creates 5 million new green jobs, and ends our dependence on Middle East oil. We'll invest $150 billion over the next decade in alternative energy sources like wind and solar and the next generation of biofuels. We'll reduce consumption through new, aggressive efficiency measures. The cap and trade program I proposed will allow us to reduce our dangerous greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, slowing the warming of our planet.
This question was submitted by 21-year-old Anjali K. of California. She asks, if elected, how do you propose to reform the No Child Left Behind Act, which both of you have admitted needs a complete overhaul?
I believe that the goals of No Child Left Behind were the right ones. But if we're going to give our children the skills to compete and win in a global economy, we're going to have to fix what's wrong with it. I have a new vision for 21st century education, one where we aren't just investing more money, but demanding more reform as well. We'll set standards for our teachers and our schools, but we'll also give them the resources they need to meet those standards. We'll recruit an army of new teachers, but we'll also pay them well and give them more support. And instead of teaching kids how to fill in a few bubbles on a test, we'll develop a curriculum and assessments that teach our kids to become more than just good test takers. That's how we'll fix No Child Left Behind and guarantee all our children the promise of a quality education.
No Child Left Behind was our first effort to focus our attention on the realities of how students perform against a common standard. So I can know how my daughter Bridget is doing in Arizona in comparison to another young person anywhere in America. We no longer accept low standards for some students and high standards for others. In this age of honest reporting, we finally see what's happening to students who were previously invisible. That's a progress all on its own, but merely compels us to seek and find solutions to the dismal facts that are before us. No Child Left Behind targets the structure of education. It doesn't address adequately the underlying cultural problems in our education system, a system that still seeks to avoid genuine accountability and responsibility for producing well-educated children. I proposed a comprehensive education reform that focuses on standards, accountability, and choice. I'll create financial incentives for schools to recruit the best teachers and for teachers to relocate in challenging education settings and teach subjects like math and science. I'll expand online educational opportunities and give low-income students access to tutors. And I'll make sure the decisions about how to use federal funds are made by those who are best suited to use those funds wisely: principals, parents, and students. No Child Left Behind was a good beginning. Now we've learned a lot of lessons. Now we have to fix it and move on. We've got a long way to go, my friends.
This question was submitted by 20-year-old Chris B. of Ohio. He asks, what steps will you take to help end genocides around the world, like those in Darfur and Burma? Furthermore, what steps will you take to prevent such atrocities from happening in the first place?
I fear that in Darfur, the United States is once again repeating the mistakes it made in Bosnia and Rwanda. The genocide in Darfur demands U.S. leadership. My administration will consider the use of all elements of American power to stop the outrageous acts of human destruction that have unfolded there. I will also seek to establish a League of Democracies, which would form the core of an international order of peace based on freedom. It could act where the UN fails to act. It could relieve human suffering in places like Darfur and other places in the world where people are so badly suffering. Democracies united with common values and common principles can work together and improve this world. It's our obligation, handed down to us by our founding fathers, that all of us are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights.
As members of the global community, we have a responsibility to care about each other's problems, not just when there's a missile pointed at us or a dictator on the march, but wherever conditions exist that could give rise to human suffering on a massive scale. In Darfur, we need to start by increasing the pressure on Khartoum to comply with the will of the international community and stop the senseless killing. We need to accelerate the effective deployment of UNAMID and help provide critical support. And we need to get serious about resolving the wider Sudanese crisis by shoring up the comprehensive peace agreement and pushing for fair, democratic elections so the Sudanese people can hold their government responsible. Along with our allies, we need to learn a lesson from Darfur and send a clear message that we will never tolerate genocide or other crimes against humanity in the future.
This question was submitted by 24-year-old Ann J. of California. She asks, Dear Senators McCain and Obama, both of you have talked about your plans to lower the cost of health care. However, a less often addressed issue is the discrimination of healthcare companies against those with pre-existing conditions.
This often means that coverage is denied to people who need it most. Please explain how your healthcare plans will address this issue.
As president, one of my highest priorities will be finally keeping the promise of affordable, accessible health care for every American. This is personal for me. My mother died of ovarian cancer in the prime of her life, and at a time when she should have been focused on getting well, she was lying in a hospital bed, arguing with her insurance company because they refused to cover her treatment. So I know something about the heartbreak caused by our healthcare system. There's a lot that my opponent doesn't tell you about his healthcare plan, like the fact that it won't do a thing to stop insurance companies from discriminating against you if you have a pre-existing condition. My plan will outlaw insurance companies' discrimination against people with pre-existing conditions. Insurance companies spend $50 billion a year on elaborate efforts to cherry-pick the healthiest patients and avoid covering everyone else. I'll put an end to this practice once and for all. And that's how we'll guarantee our healthcare system works fairly for American families.
A critical part of my healthcare plan is providing coverage for all Americans with pre-existing conditions. No American should be denied coverage simply because of a pre-existing condition. I'll create a new nonprofit Guaranteed Access Plan, or GAP, to help those who have trouble getting insurance. I'll provide new funding and guidance for the states to create these plans, allowing people who are denied coverage currently to buy policies at affordable prices. This wouldn't be a new federal entitlement program, but rather a partnership between the federal government, the states, insurers, patients, and the medical community. There would be reasonable limits on premiums, and additional assistance would be available to help people with lower incomes. Working together, we can make sure that all of those Americans with pre-existing conditions have coverage without creating the new big government, European-style health care that Senator Obama favors.
This question was submitted by 21-year-old David M. of Iowa, 23-year-old Jeffrey P. of California, and 31-year-old Jenny B. of Arizona. They ask, electronic voting machines have been shown to be inaccurate, with some not leaving a verifiable paper trail, making recounts virtually impossible. Many Americans object to the continued existence of the Electoral College in the information age, and to the exclusion of third-party candidates in the presidential debates sponsored by the CPD. What will you do to ensure that the election process is democratic, and that my vote will be counted in this election and the next?
I believe that the right to vote is the most sacred right we have, and I will never tolerate a system that disenfranchises any of our citizens who are legally entitled to vote. Law enforcement must be energetic in prosecuting both voter fraud and voter suppression. As president, I'll make sure that my Justice Department treats the right to vote with the respect and vigilance it deserves, and you deserve, and is one of your most fundamental rights as well. Let me point out that Senator Obama supports a proposal sponsored by the union bosses that allows a union organizer, a union boss, to come to someone's home and sign them up, rather than respecting their right to going into the ballot booth and preserving the fundamental right of every worker in America to, in the ballot booth, with privacy, to determine whether they want to join a union or not. This is a very dangerous proposal that's being supported by Senator Obama.
Today, over 40 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, we must renew our commitment to making sure every eligible American can exercise his or her fundamental right to vote. We have to prevent the problems we've seen in recent elections from happening again. We've seen political operatives purge voters from registration rolls for no legitimate reason, prevent eligible ex-felons from casting ballots, distribute polling equipment unevenly, and deceive voters about the time, location, and rules of elections. And sadly, these efforts have been directed primarily at minorities, the disabled, low-income individuals, and other historically disenfranchised groups. We need to enforce critical requirements like statewide registration databases. We need to make sure polling equipment is distributed equitably and that it works. And we need to make sure that every voter can make their voice heard without fear or intimidation. Your vote must be counted. But remember, your voice won't even be heard if you don't show up to vote.
This question was submitted by 22-year-old Tinbet E. of California. He asks, the United States currently has 50% of the world's prison population, a disproportionate amount of whom are minority youth with limited access to education and economic opportunities. Yet in our higher education systems, there is an underrepresentation of minority students. How do you feel about this reality? And what proactive policies could alleviate this imbalance?
In a global economy where good jobs can be located anywhere there's an internet connection, the most valuable skill you can sell is your knowledge. That's why college education is so important. It's not only a pathway to opportunity, it's a prerequisite. Under my plan, we'll finally put a college degree within reach for anyone who wants one by providing a $4,000 tax credit to any middle-class student willing to serve their community or their country. We'll also increase the number of students taking college-level courses in high school, particularly in low-income communities. We'll expand innovation and public school choice by supporting charter schools and investing in the schools of tomorrow. And we'll put a quality teacher in every classroom. Because to ensure that more minority students go to college, we have to improve dropout rates and ensure that students graduate high school ready for college or a career. That's how we'll ensure that a college education isn't a luxury reserved for the few, but an option for anyone willing to work for it.
I've said many times that education is a civil rights issue of the 21st century. That's why I've proposed comprehensive education reform. Reform that focuses on those schools and students facing the most challenging circumstances. I want to expand access to higher education by simplifying our existing patchwork of tax credits, make it easier for families to obtain the financial aid that they are entitled to. All of these programs, all of these reforms will work toward fixing the imbalance between low-income and well-off children in educational success. I also believe that prisoner reintroduction and assistance programs are essential to reducing recidivism and giving young people a second chance to succeed. I've supported legislation which funds programs, many of them faith-based, which prepare prisoners for the transition from prison to society by providing job training, counseling, mentors, counseling, and more. I believe that it is in all of our best interest to have parents with children in the home rather than in prison, former prisoners working and paying taxes, and citizens contributing rather than taking from the community.
This question was submitted by 20-year-old Jacob S. of Tennessee. He asks, I think an important quality in a leader is being able to admit when he or she was wrong on an issue and adjust his or her stance in light of new information. What is the policy position you most regret taking over the course of your career in public service, and why?
I've been an imperfect public servant, and there are more than a few positions that I've taken and later regretted. But the one that stands out most in my mind is my terribly mistaken vote against a holiday recognizing Dr. Martin Luther King way back in 1983 when I was a new congressman in the House of Representatives. I was wrong and eventually realized that in time to give full support for a state holiday in Arizona honoring Dr. King. We can all be a little late sometimes in doing the right thing. And Dr. King understood this about his fellow Americans. But he knew as well that in the long term, confidence in the reasonability and good heart of America is always well placed.
That's a great question, Jacob. When I think back on it, I think a good example is welfare reform. When President Clinton initially signed the welfare reform bill in 1996, I was concerned that it could have disastrous results for the working poor. At the time, I was working in the Illinois legislature to make sure that we were providing child care and health care and other support services for the women who were going to be kicked off the rolls after a certain time. Welfare reforms worked better than a lot of people anticipated, myself included. And what it proved is that we need to have work as a centerpiece of social policies, not only because we need to create good-paying jobs, but because there's an intrinsic dignity to having a job. And that's why we need to jumpstart job creation now. A good-paying job provides a sense of purpose, the sense that you're making a contribution, no matter how small, to the well-being of the country as a whole. America's very promise is that in this country, opportunity is open to anyone who's willing to work for it. And that's why I'm running for president, to restore that promise for all Americans.
This question was submitted by 18-year-old Haiti M. of Florida. She asks, the Brookings Institution Urban Institute Tax Policy Center has found that Senator Obama's fiscal policy would increase the national debt by $3.5 trillion by 2018, while Senator McCain's policy would increase the national debt by $5 trillion by 2018. This is going to be a huge burden on my generation and future generations. Would you not agree that fiscal solvency and stable money are far more important in the long run than keeping taxes low or continuing entitlement policies, as both of you to differing degrees have proposed?
I believe that we can provide the middle-class tax relief that Americans need while restoring fiscal responsibility and reducing the deficit. After the first economic expansion on record, in which families have seen real incomes decline by $2,000, and as families are seeing the cost of health insurance and gas prices and college tuition all going up, we must provide middle-income tax relief to help you and your families maintain economic security and invest in their futures. Under my plan, 95% of workers and their families will receive a $1,000 tax cut. And as we face the most serious economic crisis since the Great Depression, we can't just demand accountability on Wall Street. We also must demand it in Washington. As president, I will go through the entire budget, line by line, eliminating programs that don't work and aren't needed, so we put an end to runaway spending and record deficits, starting with ending a war in Iraq that costs $10 billion a month, while Iraqis are sitting on a $79 billion surplus. My plan will actually reduce the deficit relative to its current level, because we can't afford to mortgage your future on another mountain of debt.
You know, my friends, I fundamentally disagree with the analysis of the Tax Policy Center. For example, this analysis of the Tax Policy Center doesn't incorporate the impact of policies on creating jobs and doesn't attempt to incorporate reduction in the growth of spending. No analysis that focuses exclusively on revenues can claim to accurately assess the outlook for the deficit or debt. My friends, I believe that raising your taxes is not the way to improving our economy. For example, my health care plan is budget neutral over 10 years, but the Tax Policy Center claimed otherwise. I have committed to a balanced budget, hopefully by the end of my first term. We simply cannot leave a massive debt burden to our children and grandchildren. For that reason, I think that Senator Obama is seriously misguided in establishing huge new entitlement programs that will be impossible to afford down the road. If I'm elected president, I will slash wasteful spending by freezing most discretionary spending my first year and conducting a top-down review. I'll use my veto pen to eliminate pork barrel spending, and I'll reach across the aisle to finally reform Social Security in a way that preserves current benefits while making it solvent down the road. We owe that to your generation.
This question was submitted by 18-year-old Kristen C. of California. She asks, Senators Obama and McCain, compared to other developed nations, the United States still continues to have a comparatively high unintentional pregnancy rate. That can largely be attributed to both the lack of comprehensive sexual education in most schools as well as a lack of contraceptive or alternative resources for young women and men. Senators, what are your views of reproductive rights in America? And how will you work to provide better sex education as AIDS and other venereal diseases become more prevalent in America?
I believe that the noblest words ever written were by our founding fathers, who said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I believe that applies to the unborn as well as the born. And I believe that life begins at conception, but I also understand that we have to change the culture of America. I believe that we have to show a woman, a young woman who faces this very, very difficult challenge, that we will show her compassion and we will show courage. The courage to bring this unborn child into the world, and the compassion that we will have to provide for a dramatic expansion of adoptive services throughout America. Cindy and I are proud parents of an adopted child. It's been the great joy of our life. And I'm confident that we will, over time, be able to convince people that every human life is precious. Senator Obama said and voted against a bill in the Illinois State Senate that would have banned partial birth abortion. He even voted against a bill that if a child is born as a result of a failed abortion attempt, that he voted against providing immediate medical services. My friends, that's not the position of pro-life or most pro-choice people in America. I'll bring America together on this issue. We will have compassion and we will extend love to every human life, and we will try to protect the rights of the unborn as well as the born.
Regardless of ideology, we can all agree that it's time to turn the page on the policies that fail to deal with the tragedy of 10,000 teenagers getting an STD every day in this country, of 55 contracting HIV, and another 2,400 becoming pregnant. We need to help people make choices about what happens before pregnancy. It's a false argument to say that the only way to prevent disease and unintended pregnancies is abstinence education, just as it's a false argument to say that the only way is through contraception. There is a moral component to prevention. As parents, family members, or friends, we need to encourage young people to show reverence towards sexuality and intimacy. But we must not prevent teenage girls from making informed decisions because of lack of access to birth control, or a lifetime of illnesses because she doesn't understand how to protect herself. That's just common sense. And that's why I was an original co-sponsor of the Prevention First Act, which would guarantee contraceptive coverage, provide sex education in our schools, and offer rape victims factually accurate information about emergency contraception. And finally, I believe strongly in reproductive choice. I recognize that abortion is a divisive issue, and I will always respect those who disagree with me. As president, I'll make preserving women's rights under Roe a priority.
This question was submitted by 29-year-old David L. of Indiana, and from 20-year-old Holly B. of California. They ask, in your view, how should the full faith and credit clause in the U.S. Constitution apply to legal marriages of gay and lesbian persons? Should they, as their straight counterparts, have their marriages recognized even in states where it would be illegal for them to obtain a marriage license? And if you become president, how would you help the LGBT community with other issues that are important to us too, such as healthcare and discrimination in the workplace?
I'm running for president to build an America that lives up to our founding promise of equality for all, a promise that extends to our gay brothers and sisters. Throughout my career, I've fought to eliminate discrimination against LGBT Americans. As president, I'll support the complete repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I'll pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act to outlaw workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, and I'll place the full weight of my administration behind enacting the Matthew Shepard Act to outlaw hate crimes. I'll urge states to treat same-sex couples with full equality in their family and adoption laws. And while I oppose same-sex marriage and believe that civil unions represent the best way to secure that equal treatment, I do not believe the federal government should stand in the way of states that want to decide on their own how to best pursue equality for gay and lesbian couples. The full faith and credit clause has never been interpreted to require Mississippi to recognize same-sex marriages entered into in Massachusetts, for example, which is one of the reasons why I've said that the Defense of Marriage Act was unnecessary in that regard and should be repealed.
I believe that same-sex marriage is an issue that each state should decide for itself through its democratically elected legislature. That principle could be undermined if one state could effectively impose gay marriage on other states. That's why I supported the Defense of Marriage Act, which said that states do not have to give the same effect to same-sex marriages from other states. That law was passed under Congress's constitutional authority and under the full faith and credit clause to determine what effect states must give the laws of other states. I have a plan for serious healthcare reform that will make healthcare more affordable, more portable, and more accessible for all Americans. My opponent has proposed a massive new government bureaucracy that will impose an enormous burden on the taxpayer, take healthcare decisions out of the hands of consumers, and reduce quality. I think a better plan is to give all Americans a generous, refundable tax credit. In other words, cash that they can use to buy health insurance either through their employers or in the individual market. I strongly oppose discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, but I do not think the right answer is to let people bring lawsuits. Many American employers voluntarily adhere to non-discrimination policies, and I worry that a new way to sue would be just a windfall for plaintiffs' lawyers, increasing costs on American businesses during difficult economic times, especially small businesses.
This question was submitted by 31-year-old Tyler C. of North Carolina and from 17-year-old Roy W. of Washington. They ask, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is a legally binding set of basic rights for minors. The only two countries who are not signatories of the CRC are Somalia and the United States. Somalia has not had a functioning government for some time. As president, would you seek the ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child?
I strongly support the goal of this treaty, protecting the world's most vulnerable children. That vital mission is especially important in developing nations, where children are routinely subjected to unimaginable horrors like forced conscription and genital mutilation. I know there are concerns about whether this particular treaty, as currently drafted, could be interpreted too broadly and wielded as a political weapon against America. Because I share the general goals of the treaty, as president, I will work with other nations to develop agreements and strategies to protect the world's children, which also protecting America's sovereignty. I'm proud of America's record, and I'll stand by it. We have a long way to go in America, of course, but I'm proud of America's record, and I'll stand it up against any nation in the world.
It's important that the United States return to its position as a respected global leader and promoter of human rights. It's embarrassing to find ourselves in the company of Somalia, a lawless land. I will review this and other treaties and ensure that the United States resumes its global leadership in human rights.
This question was submitted by 17-year-old Shanir W. of Georgia. He asks, I live in a small community that is already suffering from the economy. With the cutbacks that have happened in the past, my school does not have enough books for each student to have one to take home. And this year, Governor Sonny Perdue cut our school's budget even further. My question is, what are you going to do to ensure that I get the quality education I deserve and want, so that one day I might be standing in your shoes?
Real change means finally giving you and your classmates everything you need to have a fighting chance to succeed in today's world. That means fixing the failures of No Child Left Behind and finally providing the funding that was promised. It means recruiting an army of new teachers and giving them the support they need and the pay they deserve. But it also means making every school in America a school of the future, and that's what we'll do when I'm president. We'll help schools integrate technology into their curriculum. We'll use new technologies to develop better tests so we can do a better job measuring how our kids are doing. We'll make sure more classrooms have computers and more schools have Wi-Fi. And we'll teach our students not only math, science, and other core academic subjects, but teamwork, critical thinking, and the communication skills you need to compete for that good-paying job. The very promise of education in America is that no matter what we look like or where we come from or who our parents are, each of us should have the opportunity to fulfill our God-given potential. That's the chance I was given, and I'm running for president to guarantee every child has that chance.
As I've said, I believe that education is a civil rights issue of the 21st century. My education plan targets federal funds at schools like yours, providing major incentives to hire better teachers, expand learning opportunities, and help all students learn and achieve. It's simply unacceptable that students like you don't have access to textbooks. We also need to keep our economy growing so that states have the tax revenue they need to provide a world-class education to their students. My plan is focused on growing the economy and creating jobs by keeping taxes low on small businesses, providing health care to every American without creating a European-style bureaucracy, and lowering the price of energy for American consumers. I fear that under Senator Obama's plan, our economy would continue to stagnate, jobs would flow overseas, and our public services would suffer.
This question was submitted by 13-year-old Cheyenne R. of Nevada. She asks, "My dad is a veteran receiving medical care from the VA. How are you planning to make considerable changes to provide former soldiers like my dad adequate care versus the subpar care he is currently receiving? It saddens me to see him in so much pain, and the VA won't do anything about it."
Reforming our VA healthcare system is a priority for me. I've fought for veterans all my life and will continue to do so. Recently, we passed legislation which would help our veterans. It was the first legislative initiative in a long time. But let's be clear. We have a significant increase in PTSD. We have a significant increase in combat-related wounds. And we also have a strain on the Veterans Administration. I want to give every veteran who has a routine health care need to go to the VA if they want to, but also to have a plastic card so that they can go out and get the health care that they need if it's a routine health care need. Now, we ought to focus our attention and expand dramatically both the military medical care system and the VA in order to treat the PTSD, which unfortunately is a result of a very tough war. I'm proud of the men and women who are serving. We've got to make sure that all Americans know that we are giving them the care that they have earned, because that's not only our obligation to them, but as George Washington said many years ago, young Americans will not serve, and they will know how previous generations are treated, and their ability and their desire to serve their country will be directly related to see how previous generations are cared for. I know veterans, I know war, I know the wounds of war. I'll keep the peace, but meanwhile, I'll care for our veterans and their families.
Cheyenne, I want to thank your father for his service to this country, and I want to thank you. We honor the service of all our men and women in uniform, and we remember that when we send our soldiers to war, their families go with them. America has a sacred trust with those who serve in its uniform. As president, I will keep that trust. It starts with the promise to provide high-quality, affordable health care for every single veteran, like your father. I'll put the VA at the cutting edge of health care delivery so that our veterans are getting the best care possible. We'll make the VA a leader in specialty care so that troops returning with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, and other injuries get the treatment they need. And we'll stand up against proposals to ration care and reject the idea that the VA should only treat combat wounds. We cannot risk our veterans' health care by turning the VA into just another health insurer. We need to make sure the VA is strong enough to treat every veteran who depends on it, and that's what I'll do as president.